combat drugs in the streets of our cities. You see, that's the kind of gap between rhetoric and reality that we just can't tolerate and maintain trust in government. Mr. President, we think promises are more important than that. And this is one that Congress, Democrats and Republicans alike, are determined to keep. Are there fundamental differences between the White House and the Democratic Congress? Yes, there are some. But you know, there also are things on which we can work together. We'll work with the White House to create a fair and equitable system of welfare reform about which the President spoke. Help get people off the welfare rolls and onto productive payrolls. We're for that. We'll enthusiastically embrace an insurance plan to indemnify Americans against the sudden financial ravage of a catastrophic illness. You bet. We'll actively promote productivity and increased competitiveness. And we'll support with our votes and with our hearts and with our prayers any reasonable effort to reduce the terrible tensions that afflict this world. That's what America stands for. And America can't stand still, you know. We've moved forward only when we've been raising our sights, not when we've been lowering them. Our children and our children's children will hold us accountable not for what we've said we'd do, but for what we've done. We wish the President good health. We offer him our friendship. We're anxious to work with him as full and equal partners in this, the freest and greatest government on earth. Thank you for listening. Good night.
Jim Wright, the new Speaker of the House of Representatives, Democrat from Texas, Robert Byrd, who has been returned as the Senate Majority Leader, Robert Byrd of West Virginia, giving a strong, carefully crafted, well-delivered rebuttal to President Reagan's State of the Union message. Senate Majority Leader Byrd called Mr. Reagan's secret arms dealing with the government of the Ayatollah Khomeini a breach of faith, both here at home with Americans and with our allies abroad. Senator Byrd said it has created a gathering sense of mistrust, that was his word. But Senator Byrd said the new Democratic Congress still wants to work with Mr. Reagan to help restore what he called a coherent U.S. foreign policy. House Speaker Jim Wright was upbeat, saying that the nation can rebound from what Congressman Wright called the, quote, Iranian misadventure, unquote. Wright, too, offered cooperation in trying to make sure the remaining 2 years of the Reagan presidency do not turn into a period of discord and conflict. Speaker Wright criticized Mr. Reagan's spending habits, saying the president preferred funding weapons over education. He talked about, and these are his words, the gap between Mr. Reagan's reality and his rhetoric. Now, when we come back, some of our experienced CBS News correspondents will offer their views about tonight's address, the president's address, and the Democratic response. So stay here with us.
This is CBS.
Share the spirit on Channel 3. Sharing the spirit, talk about inspiration. We're giving our best, that's what it's all about.
Channel 3 is proud to share the spirit of Fighting Illini basketball for the 34th consecutive season. Be watching Wednesday night at 7 when the Illini take on Indiana.
We're taking it to the top. Share the spirit on Channel 3.
I think Susie brings a real sparkle to our news. I think it's in her eyes. I think it's in her delivery. I think all the experience that she's had in Central Illinois in broadcasting is it's invaluable. She's very professional, and she's willing to do anything it takes to get the news on. She's just as nice off the air as she is on the air. And I think that's one thing that she brings. If you're in a group and you've got a real effervescent person with you, that brings everyone else up, and that's the whole idea.
Suzanne Reed and Jerry Slade, weeknights at 6 and 10.
Steve Kelly with highlights of tonight's high school basketball action.
This CBS News special report continues. The State of the Union, 1987. From Capitol Hill, here again is Dan Rather.
Now, to help us analyze and put in perspective, if we possibly can, President Reagan's State of the Union address and the Democratic response, we've asked a number of our veteran CBS News correspondents to join us here, including Bill Plant, Bob Schieffer, Wyatt Andrews, Ray Brady, Leslie Stahl, and Bruce Morton. To start us off, CBS News congressional correspondent Phil Jones reports that while the president's tone was upbeat and positive, that may not be enough this year.
Dan, I must say, before looking at the substance of the president's speech tonight here, I was in the chamber when he delivered the speech. I've seen a number of State of the Union addresses, and I was absolutely stunned at what occurred on that floor tonight. I'm not sure you were able to see it on the television, but on at least 3 occasions when the president was talking about what he wanted to do, the Democrats sat in their seats, did not applaud, while the Republicans on their side of the aisle stood up. For a president who it seemed to everybody needed to come in here tonight a bit weakened to seek cooperation and bipartisan spirit, there was no effort there, and I've just never seen anything like it.
Phil, if I may, I don't want to break as Speaker Wright might have said, you're a locomotive pulling a long train of thought here. But we were able to see some of that on television, and it appeared from the pictures that we got that the situation was that members of the president's cabinet in the first few rows were standing up particularly early in the address to lead the applause, to try to get something started. And when the president delivered a line such as, "We will not yield to terrorist blackmail," they stood up and tried to lead the applause. And in some cases, that just didn't work.
It didn't work. The Republicans were actually the ones who stood up most of the time first. They were followed then by the Reagan cabinet, and that didn't work either. And this happened on 3 occasions there where clearly the Democrats just flat out disagreed with what the president was saying, with what his policy and ideas were. But he is on a collision course. It is very obvious here with the Democratic leaders and the Democrats, and in some instances even with Republicans. There are many here tonight who will feel that the president just didn't go far enough in tackling the problems.
Well, Phil, among those, can you think of any Republican who may say tomorrow or in succeeding days, listen, I like Ronald Reagan, he's my party's president, my country's president, but I think he should have said more about the Iranian situation?
Well, it seemed that when he was addressing very briefly the Iranian situation, that they liked what they heard wasn't quite enough. And I think that you may not find them out tomorrow going to the cameras to say this, but privately I would expect you to say that expect them to say that they were disappointed.
There was a delegation of Republicans at the White House today, was there not, urging on at least the president's aides that he accept some of the blame and even apologize for the secret deal with the Khomeini government.
Well, I think that this is what many of the Republicans up here would like for him to have done. But he didn't do it. The fact is, moving beyond Iran, many of the Republicans up here have real difficulties with the president's agenda. They are interested in doing some very specific things in trade and on balancing the budget, on the deficit. They did not hear many specifics on this tonight. And these Republicans, many of them, are looking right back to what happened in November, to the Republicans, especially in the Senate, who had gone along with this president for all the years in his cuts in social programs and adding more spending to defense. And these people are survivors, and they're going to say, look, we have to start putting some distance between ourselves and this president. He may not be a lame duck president. It's far too early to say that. But he's clearly a feisty duck, and that is going to lead to all sorts of problems up here, because the members of Congress sense that he has lost a lot of his standing, a lot of his popularity or his programs with the American people.
Thanks, Phil. President Reagan tonight covered a wide variety of subjects, making promises here and pledges there, but the words themselves almost didn't matter as much as the impression President Reagan made or failed to make on the people in the House chamber and on you, the citizens at home. As we hear now from White House correspondent Bill Plant.
Dan, the first item on President Reagan's agenda tonight was not anything in the speech. It was reestablishing his own leadership after this period of near isolation which followed the Iran-Iraq scandal and his recuperation from surgery. In the past, the State of the Union message has always been a real bully pulpit for Ronald Reagan. It's allowed him to combine his skills as a communicator with a showcase for the major initiatives of his presidency.
a total cut in tax rates of 30%.
Put in place a defense program that redeems the neglect of the past decade. A plan for action to simplify the entire tax code. It is a strategic defense initiative aimed ultimately at finding a non-nuclear defense to win freedom in Afghanistan, in Angola, in Cambodia, and in Nicaragua.
But this year, despite the president's ability to evoke images and patriotic sentiment, there are many who believe that Mr. Reagan has passed the point of no return in terms of getting new initiatives through Congress.
I think that the White House and the president are preoccupied with defending their position in this Iran-Contra matter. And I think you've seen the last of major initiatives out of the White House.
The major new initiatives of this speech were presented under the banner of competitiveness, the quest for excellence. But apart from the endorsement of insurance against catastrophic illness, over which there's still disagreement as to the final proposal, a lot of the major requests for legislation have been heard before. Still, some Republican lawmakers remain hopeful.
I just don't think there's all that heavy a shadow hanging over things as some of you folks would like to portray.
We're here to legislate. We're not here to, just diddle around and spend time off in the vapors. We got stuff to do.
But there's little doubt that it's going to be tougher to get that stuff done. Heading into President Reagan's last 2 years, both houses of Congress are under the control of the Democrats. But even more important, no member of either party any longer needs to fear Ronald Reagan in an election campaign. The result, a far less agreeable Congress than in the last 6 years.
He had almost every single Republican in the Congress supporting him. It didn't then take many Democrats. That's gone now. And I think that's the biggest loss he has suffered.
So things have really changed, and there are a lot of people who argue that the best Ronald Reagan can hope for in the last 2 years is a kind of holding action to hang on to the gains that he's already made. Dan?
Thanks, Bill. The latest CBS News New York Times poll indicated that while President Reagan's overall approval rating has risen slightly from its low point of 47% late last year to 52% now, Mr. Reagan continues to suffer from his decision to send arms to Iran. For example, more Americans now believe Mr. Reagan is, quote, lying, unquote. That was the word used in the poll, when he says he didn't know about aiding Nicaraguan rebels with money from the Iran arms deal. For a president who has enjoyed tremendous personal popularity in his first 6 years in office and continues to do so to this day, this doubt is new territory for Ronald Reagan and for many of his supporters. More about that now from our chief Washington correspondent, Bob Schieffer. Bob?
Dan, even Ronald Reagan's friends admit that the Iran affair has kind of revived a whole series of questions about Ronald Reagan that were either dismissed or just glossed over during other times in his presidency. Questions that really have to do with his grasp of the presidency. I talked to one of the president's best friends, former Nevada Senator Paul Laxalt, this week about this. He thinks the president is doing fine, but he readily concedes that these questions are being asked by his friends and his adversaries.
Before the operation, and there was a lot of talk about this, and I had colleagues call me, said, is the old man slipping? I said, I haven't seen a sign of it.
Even so, the fact that Laxalt, one of the president's closest friends and advisors, is getting such questions underlines the depth of the doubt about the president that has sprung up in official Washington and among many academics since the Iran disclosures.
I think one of the things to remember about this crisis is that Reagan was already in a fair amount of trouble before it ever developed. That the past year, 1986, was not at all a good year for him.
Has cleared the tower.
The space disaster just a year ago forced postponement of the president's last State of the Union speech, and after that, many things did not seem to go as planned.
We have an agreement, Mr. President!
At the superpower Iceland summit, the American side seemed caught off guard by Soviet proposals, and while no agreements were reached, the episode raised serious questions in Congress and among allied governments over just what U.S. nuclear policy was. Then in November, Republicans lost control of the Senate, even though the president put his own prestige on the line, campaigning hard for Republican candidates. Through all that, the president's popularity remained stable, but the Iran affair brought a barrage of criticism unlike anything Ronald Reagan had ever experienced, and with it, for the first time, his popularity plunged. In 1980, he had ridden the issue of hostages in Iran into office, promising a foreign policy to restore pride at home and respect overseas. Why now had the same issue hurt him so badly?
I think the Iranian thing brought to the surface that sometimes you can delegate too freely, and that in this particular instance that probably occurred.
Others argue it went deeper. Ronald Reagan has always represented traditional values, and even those who didn't like him felt they knew exactly where he stood. And that may be what made the Iran disclosures so devastating. Ronald Reagan was suddenly discovered doing what no one expected.
He came into office in 1980 with a pledge that he would stand tall, that the United States would not bow either to the communists or to terrorists. And here we find that he's actually been paying ransom to terrorists. That's the important part of this crisis.
The president's friend said tonight's speech was the most important State of the Union speech since his first one, and hailed it as another new beginning. But once the cheering stops, as the author of a new book on the Reagan presidency recently observed, Iran will still make a tough year for Ronald Reagan.
People are looking at him with different eyes. They're scrutinizing him. They're expecting him to give an account. You know, the mere demand that he either apologize or reveal things or show that he's on top means that every time he appears, there's going to be this implicit challenge. Win back our trust.
And to Wills, that means that many of the programs the president has supported in the past will now simply have to make it on their own. Dan?
Well, Bob, can the president turn this around? Can he sort of in a jiu-jitsu, psychological way, get the Iran thing to work for him? Is there any chance that'll happen, or are we going to go through a year and a half or 2 years now of simply confrontation and deterioration?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult for him, Dan. Bill Plant was saying earlier in the broadcast that the people of the White House saw this speech tonight, the #1 objective, to look good. Well, there's no question he looked terrific. There was a little joke going around that he looked so good that maybe all this business about prostate surgery was a joke, that maybe really he was in the hospital to get a facelift. He looked terrific tonight. But he has real problems up on the Hill, as Phil Jones has been talking about, and I'm afraid it's going to take a lot more than looking good for him to have an easy go of it this time.
Thanks, Bob. President Reagan spent some time tonight talking about the future of U.S.-Soviet relations. The president said he wants to work for an improved atmosphere, but he also underlined strongly again his full support of continuing research on the so-called Star Wars project, the Strategic Defense Initiative. We talked earlier with our CBS News Moscow correspondent Wyatt Andrews to see how these mixed signals will be received.
What the Soviets are looking for is not the specifics of what President Reagan might say in broad generality in a State of the Union address. They're looking for some sort of overture to them that would perhaps make another concession in the round of arms control talks now underway. And they are also, I think, more significantly than anything else, looking to see how President Reagan emerges from the Iran scandal and whether or not he urges with his power and popularity intact. And that, in a very broad way, is far more important to them than President Reagan's, the intricacies of his speech tonight.
Do they consider him a wounded president?
Yes. Yes, and it makes a difference to them. The Soviets see the Reagan administration as something of a ticking clock. As strange as that sounds, with 2 years left in the Reagan administration, the odds are that the Soviets might not be able to strike a deal with this administration unless they do it in the next 9 or 10 months. And if I were a betting man, I'd say that sometime they will push that 9 or 10 months to the limit, but are probably motivated to make a deal with this president.
I want to make sure I understand you. It's your read that they consider this, the next 9 or 10 months, an ideal time of opportunity.
It's my reading, based on everything that I've heard here, that the Soviets, while they don't consider President Reagan especially in command of the facts of arms control matters, they do see him as a powerful president. And they have an interest in dealing with a powerful president because he, after all, could push a treaty through Congress. If they don't deal with the Reagan administration, in other words, they might have to wait perhaps as long as 2 years into the next presidency before they cut another arms control deal. And that would be not 2, but 4 years into more Star Wars research, more allocations for Star Wars, and that's clearly what they do not want.
And do they think that President Reagan will be eager to make a deal in the last 2 years of his presidency?
I think that, again, with the given that the Soviets see something of a last year deadline on arms control negotiations with this president, they will push this year to the very end of what they see as that limit. perhaps playing the card that in their mind says that President Reagan wants to go down in history as a man who cut a deal with the Soviet Union. So in that sense, if I were a gambling man, I would say, based on what I have heard here, that the Soviets will push this year to the end, but then try to come to some serious terms with President Reagan and try to use what historical pressures they see on President Reagan to their advantage.
Any likelihood of a summit here in Washington soon, Wyatt?
I wouldn't say soon, but again, strictly on the gambling score, I would say that there would be, I would guess that there will be a summit in Washington this year, later, not sooner.
Thank you, Wyatt. Joining me now are my colleagues Bob Schieffer, Bill Plant, and Phil Jones to talk for a few minutes about foreign policy, where it stands in the remaining part of Ronald Reagan's second term. Bob Schieffer, in what has to go down as one of the more impressive performances for the Democrats coming with their State of the Union. You might say, well, that isn't saying much because the Democrats are rarely impressive on these occasions. Jim Wright and Senator Byrd said that foreign policy is too important to be done in the dark. There's been a lot of talk about Ronald Reagan doesn't have a coherent foreign policy. But are we to take from that we're going to see some initiatives from Congress on foreign policy?
I don't know quite how to read that, but I do think this. I think if Ronald Reagan is going to get anywhere with this Congress, it's probably going to be in the area of foreign policy. They are just so far apart on this whole question of the budget and what to do about domestic spending that I just think they're going to be very contentious on all fronts there. However, I think there is the possibility, and I talked to several people on the Hill about this today, there is the possibility that we may actually see something done in the area of arms control before the year is out. I think the chances of that are 50-50. And you say, well, what is the reason for that? Is it the president going to do something? Is the Congress going to do something? As it was said to me by one United States senator, look, the Soviets want an agreement on strategic arms, and Ronald Reagan needs an agreement on strategic arms. And he says, if it happens, that's what will drive it.
Well, Bill Plant at the White House, what about the chances that President Reagan's right flank, particularly within his own party, is going to concentrate in saying, listen, you can't go to the Soviets now because you go in a weakened position. The thing for you to do if you want to go down in history as a great president is don't deal with the Soviets.
Well, Dan, the president can easily appease the right by his strong statement tonight in favor of more aid for the Contras. Speaking of things which will probably never happen between this president and this Congress, you can put that down as one. But the White House clearly sees arms control as the president's way out of this mess that he's in. And at the soonest possible opportunity that he has to sit down and do something with which he can politically get away, probably some kind of an arrangement for a limitation on intermediate range missiles in Europe, he will do it.
Phil Jones on Capitol Hill, is the expectation that George Shultz will stay or go as Ronald Reagan moves toward possibly another summit meeting with Gorbachev?
Well, I don't think anybody here really knows. I think you could say generally that majority of the people hope that Secretary of State Shultz stays, even though he admitted today that his performance in the Iran situation left a lot of things to be desired. I think most of the people up here still have a lot of respect for the Secretary of State, and they certainly hope that he will stay and add some balance to the administration. But I'd just like to address the whole business of arms control and whether or not anything like that's going to come out of here. I think that the Democrats are clearly going to put the pressure on the president to get to the bargaining table. They have indicated that they're going to pass maybe some sort of legislation to try to force his hand. Apparently the president is anticipating that because he said tonight, or suggested tonight, that Congress might be trying to enact Soviet positions in this area, and he said, if you do that, I'll veto it.
Phil, how much more difficult is it going to be for the president to go to the negotiating table of the Soviets now that Senator Jesse Helms has become the ranking minority member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult. Senator Helms is a Republican, but he has caused the Reagan administration a lot of trouble in the area of arms control and other in Central America over the last 5 years. So it's going to be a little more difficult because of that.
Thank you, Phil. When we come back, Bruce Morton will have a tale of two families and Ronald Reagan. So stay with us.
Taste this.
The whole thing?
Uh-huh.
That's
That's a big crunch for such a little thing.
That little thing's packed with goodness.
I can believe it with a crunch like that. It's got a nice nutty taste.
And it has no added sugar or preservatives.
There's no room.
Huh.
What are these little things?
Grape nut cereal.
Grape nuts? I could go for a whole bowl full.
You got it.
Have a bowl of crunchy, nutty, packed with goodness grape nuts today.
Stovetop stuffing in canisters makes a lot or a little in one easy step.
When you want dishes quick and delicious, you can be flexible with Stovetop tonight.
It's the right stuff, always enough. It's great for me at home with the TV.
Have it for you or fix it for two more. It serves from 1 to 8 just right. Be flexible with Stovetop tonight.
In flexible serve canisters.
One of Ronald Reagan's most effective political rallying cries over the years has been a kind of challenge. Are you better off with me than before me? We have the story now of two Chicago families who evidently felt yes, at least for a long period of time, because they both supported President Reagan in 1980. CBS News correspondent Bruce Morton paid the families a visit to ask how their feelings may have changed in the 6+ years of the Reagan presidency.
For John and Judy York and their children, Charlotte, George, and Alice, it might be the best of times. Weekend sledding at their vacation home outside the city. Family fun.